Friends, colleagues, and all who care about the direction of this country, let me begin with a simple question. What happens when the promises of a political leader collide with the harsh realities of an economic system in crisis? That, my friends, is where Donald Trump's presidency now stands. And it is precisely why his presidency is in serious trouble. When Trump first took office, he told the American people that he would be the great deal maker. He promised jobs would return, industries would thrive, and America would be great again. It was a powerful hook, a marketing success. But marketing does not change the fundamental contradictions of capitalism. And it is those contradictions that are now pulling the rug from under his presidency. When we speak about the unraveling of Trump's presidency, the first and most urgent reality to confront is the collapse of trust that follows broken promises. Think back to the campaign that swept him into office. He positioned himself as the outsider, the disruptor, the one who would finally listen to the anger and despair of millions who felt left behind. He promised that factories would hum again, that jobs would return, that ordinary working families would finally be at the center of policy rather than corporations and elites. For many, this was a powerful hook, a lifeline in a sea of disappointment. Yet what followed was a familiar pattern. The rhetoric of change collided with the reality of power, and the promises evaporated as quickly as they were made. Here is where the real damage lies. People do not simply forget promises made by their leaders. They carry them like a debt, a contract between the governed and those who govern. When that contract is violated, it doesn't just create disappointment. It breeds a deep mistrust, a feeling that no matter who sits in the Oval Office, the result will be the same. Trump assured his base that he was different, that he was not a politician, but a businessman who knew how to deliver. That hook worked brilliantly in winning loyalty, but it also raised the stakes when delivery never came, when jobs kept moving overseas, when wages stagnated, and when wealth flowed ever more aggressively into the hands of billionaires. The very foundation of his appeal began to crumble. Think of the worker in the Midwest who believed that tariffs and America First policies would restore his factory job. Think of the family in rural America who believed that healthcare costs would come down because Trump said he would replace Obamacare with something better. Think of the communities in decay that thought infrastructure would be rebuilt because he promised the biggest infrastructure plan ever. None of these promises materialized. Instead, those communities witnessed more neglect, more corporate favoritism, and more political theater with no substance. Each broken promise was like a crack in the glass of trust. And now the entire pane is shattering. The problem is not just that Trump failed, it is that he failed while insisting he was the one person who would never betray his supporters. That creates a deeper kind of political wound. People who believed in him are not just disappointed. They feel deceived. And deception breeds anger far stronger than mere dissatisfaction. This is the hidden engine of why his presidency is in serious trouble. You cannot govern a people whose trust you have squandered. Because politics at its core, it is not about power alone. It is about legitimacy. Without legitimacy, power becomes fragile, and fragility invites collapse. Here is the hook that every listener must hold on to. When leaders break their promises, they do more than damage their own reputations. They erode the very faith in democracy itself. If Trump was the outsider who turned out to be just like the insiders, then many ask, is there anyone who can truly represent the people? That question is dangerous because it feeds cynicism, disengagement, and despair, and yet it also creates a potential opening, a moment when people can begin to imagine alternatives outside the narrow boundaries of traditional politics. So why is Trump's presidency in such serious trouble? Because the trust that once bound him to millions of people has been shattered. Once that bond breaks, no amount of spin, no amount of rallies, no amount of slogans can patch it back together. The people who once saw him as their champion now see him as just another politician serving the wealthy at their expense. The consequence is not only the weakening of his presidency, but also a growing demand for something entirely different. And here lies the deeper message. When promises collapse, new possibilities can emerge, but only if people channel their anger into action rather than resignation. That is why broken promises lead not only to broken trust, but to the unraveling of power itself. Every presidency, no matter how strong it appears in the beginning, eventually encounters the inescapable weight of reality. Promises are easy, slogans are powerful, and campaigns are built on inspiration, but governing is an entirely different test. History has shown us repeatedly that the gap between what leaders pledge and what they can deliver is the space where presidencies are made or broken. That is the reckoning of reality, and it has no mercy for those who think they can outmaneuver it. Trump's presidency is now in that very position. The promises of restored greatness, booming jobs, and economic revival are colliding with the contradictions of a system that cannot and will not allow those promises to be fulfilled. This is not simply Trump's personal failure. It is the inevitable outcome of a president trying to bend reality with rhetoric alone. Look back at history and you will see the pattern. Richard Nixon came into office with the image of a strong strategist who could end turmoil at home and abroad. He promised order and stability, but reality arrived in the form of Vietnam, inflation, and a restless American public that no longer believed in the system. The gap between Nixon's promises and the failures that followed did not just weaken his presidency, it ended it. Jimmy Carter entered office as the honest outsider, the man who would bring morality and transparency back to politics. Yet reality met him in the form of an oil crisis, stagflation, and a nation losing confidence in its direction. His promises evaporated under the pressure of forces he could not control, and his presidency collapsed under the weight. Each time the reckoning of reality exposed the limits of political branding. Trump's presidency follows this same trajectory, but with even sharper contradictions. He promised to revive manufacturing while global capitalism continues to push jobs overseas in search of cheap labor. He promised to rebuild infrastructure while handing tax cuts to the wealthy, draining the resources needed for public investment. He promised to end forever wars even as the military budget ballooned and new conflicts emerged. These contradictions are not small, they are structural. They reveal a leader trapped in the machinery of a system far more powerful than his campaign slogans. And when promises clash with reality, it is always reality that wins. Here is a hook you cannot ignore. Every time Trump's supporters see that their lives have not improved, every time they notice that their communities are still struggling, they feel the gap between words and reality. It doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly, like a crack spreading through a wall. At first, the slogans may still inspire, but eventually disappointment becomes undeniable. The rallies may be loud, but the kitchen table tells a quieter truth. Bills are higher, wages are stagnant, and the future does not look brighter. That is the reckoning that no president can escape. The danger Trump faces is not just political opposition or legal challenges. The greater danger is the erosion of faith among those who once believed he could deliver. This is why his presidency is in such serious trouble when the promises of a leader are tested against the realities of an economy riddled with inequality and global competition and systemic decay. The promises lose every time. The presidency then becomes not a symbol of strength, but of impotence. And once that perception spreads, even the most powerful political machine cannot stop the unraveling. This is where the motivational lesson lies. Leaders may try to defy history, but history has a way of repeating itself. Every presidency that builds itself on lofty promises, but refuses to address the underlying realities of the system, eventually collapses under the same weight. Trump is learning this now as his own rhetoric is consumed by the very forces he ignored. The reckoning of reality is not just a political event. It is the reminder that no president, no matter how confident or defiant, can outmaneuver the contradictions of a broken system. The louder the promises, the harsher the reckoning when they fail. That, my friends, is why this presidency is not just faltering, it is unraveling under the unstoppable gravity of reality itself. The endless scandals, lawsuits, and media firestorms that swirl around Trump may dominate headlines, but they are not the true reason his presidency is in trouble. They are only the surface, the symptoms of a deeper illness that runs through the veins of the system itself. Focusing on his personality or behavior misses the bigger picture. The real crisis is structural. It lies in an economy that works for the wealthy while leaving behind the majority, in a political system captured by corporations and lobbyists, in a democracy that has been hollowed out until only its image remains. Trump did not create this system. He is a product of it, and his presidency is faltering because he cannot solve problems that are hardwired into its design. This is the hook. If you think Trump's failures are unique to him, you are missing the larger truth. Any leader who steps into office promising change but refuses to challenge the system itself will end up in the same trap. They will be forced to protect the interests of the wealthy. They will be pushed to continue policies that deepen inequality, and they will be boxed in by a global economy that demands profits above people. Trump promised to be different, but he operated within the same rules. And those rules ensure that working people continue to lose. That is why the crisis we see today are not the failures of one man, but of an entire structure. Consider the economy he inherited and the one he leaves behind. Wages for the majority have remained flat, while the cost of housing, healthcare, and education has soared. Jobs that returned were often low-paying, insecure, or temporary, hardly the foundation for a stable middle class. At the same time, Wall Street soared, billionaires multiplied, and corporations reaped record profits. And this was not an accident, nor was it the result of Trump's unique strategy. It is the design of a system that funnels wealth upward. No matter who sits in the White House, the presidency becomes a manager of inequality, not a transformer of it. And Trump's presidency is breaking under the pressure of that contradiction. Look at the political side. Laws are written not by the will of the people, but by the hands of corporate lobby campaigns, are financed not by small donors, but by billionaires and super PACs who expect returns on their investments. Decisions about war, trade, and taxes are shaped not by the needs of working families, but by the demands of the powerful. Trump spoke of draining the swamp, but the swamp grew deeper under his watch, filled with corporate insiders, Wall Street bankers, and military contractors. The structure ensured that he could not change it, even if he wanted to. The system bends every leader to its logic, and in the end, it is the people who pay the price. Here is where the real trouble comes in. When scandals erupt, when controversies dominate the news, they distract us from seeing this deeper truth. But the public is not blind forever. They notice when their lives are not improving. They notice when wealth keeps flowing upward while their communities struggle. They notice when the promised change turns out to be business as usual. That awareness is growing, and it erodes not just Trump's legitimacy, but the legitimacy of the system as a whole. His presidency is in trouble because it cannot hide the failure any longer. The structure itself is breaking down, and no amount of distraction can cover that up. This is the motivational lesson. Look, do not let yourself be misled by the noise of daily scandals. Look deeper. Understand that the true crisis is not about one leader's flaws, but about an entire system that produces inequality and disillusionment. Trump is simply the most recent face of that system, and his struggles reveal its weakness. When people begin to see beyond the surface, when they realize the real enemy is not one individual, but the structure that limits every leader, then the possibility of change emerges. The trouble facing Trump is the opening for people to demand something different, something that finally puts the needs of the majority above the profits of the few. And once that realization takes hold, no scandal, no distraction, and no leader can stop it. The unraveling of Trump's presidency is not just a tale of failure. It is also a moment filled with possibility. Trouble in leadership is always a double-edged sword. On one side, it exposes betrayal, disappointment, and collapse. On the other, it ignites the chance for transformation, for a deeper questioning of the system that allowed such betrayal to occur in the first place. Trump's fall is not only about him, it is about what the American people choose to do in the wake of broken promises and shattered illusions. This is the hook worth holding on to the end. False hope can be the beginning of genuine change if we dare to seize it. Think about the millions who believed Trump's message that he was different, that he would put ordinary people above elites, that he would fight for jobs, health care, and dignity. Their disappointment is real, but disappointment does not have to lead only to despair. It can also lead to awakening. When a leader fails so openly, when the gap between rhetoric and reality becomes undeniable, people are forced to confront truths they might have ignored before. They begin to ask why, no matter who is in power, the same problems persist. They begin to see that perhaps the problem is not only with leaders, but with the system itself. That awareness is the seed of transformation. History is filled with moments where failure at the top sparked energy at the bottom. The Great Depression revealed the failures of capitalism so brutally that it created space for massive reforms and labor organizing that reshaped the United States for decades. The civil rights movement emerged out of centuries of broken promises of equality, transforming disappointment into determination. In each case, the collapse of trust in leaders opened the door for movements from below to demand something new. Trump's presidency, troubled and stumbling, could be another one of those openings. The anger and frustration he leaves behind can be redirected not into apathy, but into action. Here is a powerful hook. The same people who once believed in Trump's promise of change are proof that the desire for change is real. Their loyalty, though misplaced, shows how deeply millions yearn for a different kind of politics, one that speaks to their struggles and hopes. That desire does not vanish when a leader fails, it intensifies. The challenge is whether that energy can be turned away from false promises and toward real solutions that address inequality, insecurity, and injustice. If it can, then Trump's failure becomes not the end of hope, but the beginning of a more genuine movement. The trouble he faces then should be understood as a mirror. It reflects not only the shortcomings of one man, but the decay of a political and economic order that no longer serves the majority. When people look into that mirror and finally see the truth, they face a choice: accept the decay as permanent or demand something better. This is why his unraveling matters. It is not simply about whether Trump remains politically relevant. It is about whether the American people take this as a lesson that empty slogans and theatrical leadership are not enough. The real work is to build structures that prioritize collective good